So, cyber warfare is a very important topic in cybersecurity, and it's the kind of thing that we are only going to see more of over the next 30 years. It's very challenging. It has a very different set of costs and benefits, both for individual companies, but also for policymakers and politicians. Basically, we're trying to answer all of these questions in a totally new environment. So, for example, when is an attack on infrastructure considered an attack of war? Well, if it's a physical attack on a physical piece of infrastructure, it is almost always considered to be an act of war. But if it's a nation state attacking another nation state through the internet, is that really war? Does that look like war? And how do we reason about a proportional response in that kind of an environment? Is cyberspace somehow different enough for us to think of it as an actual separate domain for war, like land, sea, air, all that sort of thing? I don't know. This is a really challenging question to answer because there are implications, especially for the parts of the internet, the parts of cyberspace that are tightly integrated with physical infrastructure, whether it's land, sea, or air related. The different ways that we can think about offense in cyber warfare versus defense right now, it's very asymmetric, much easier to attack than to defend. Does that mean that we should greenlight active response whenever especially for companies like Google or Microsoft or Facebook, targets of cyber warfare? Should they be allowed to internally respond even if it means that they may be attacking someone in a different nation? I don't know. Really challenging question to answer. What are the benefits of having strategic tactical war on the internet? These are very challenging questions to answer. And I don't know that I'm going to be able to give you even remotely definitive answers to these questions, but this is what cyber warfare looks like. This is why this is such a challenging problem. We have to be able to answer these questions in an environment that is rapidly changing in response to new developments in technology. Now, it's not new. We have almost certainly had examples of warfare on the internet. I'll go through 5 of them. The first one, Estonia, back in 2007, was the subject of many denial of service attacks that are widely attributed to political altercation with Russia. This shut down large portions of the Estonian government. So this is probably the first clearest example of something that you would think of as like a cyber warfare incident. The Stuxnet worm around the same time was starting to get traction. It was essentially a way of attacking a particular model of computer that was used to control the separators for the Iranian nuclear industry that was separating, basically purifying uranium for use in a nuclear reactor. And this is still a very hot topic in terms of a possible cyber warfare, an example of possible cyber warfare. To continue, Israel and Syria, they fired missiles in 2007 that did not show up on Syrian radar screens because the software had been replaced with fake images indicating that there was no problem. Now, this is a good example of how cyber war is actually mixing with physical war. So one of the answers to the list of questions that we can go back here is there is sort of a corollary to this sort of cyber infrastructure piece, which is to say, if you are physically attacking physical infrastructure, then you augment it with a cyber component. Does that count as cyber warfare, or is it simply just warfare? Good example of it between Israel and Syria here. In Canada, in 2011, the government revealed that it had actually been the attack of many concerns that had been traced back to servers in China. This is really critical because it was a public national acknowledgement and blame that this had actually come from China. That does not happen in public official channels very often. The United States, for example, has long suspected that it has been subject to similar attacks from China and from Russia, but it has very rarely acknowledged any of these attacks in a public fashion. And then, of course, Russian hackers infiltrating various national governments, NATO, the Ukraine, using cyber warfare. I have left off all of the traces of the 2016 election. I'm not really going to get into anything there either, but I think you could look at those as other very interesting incidents to speculate on as to whether or not they would constitute an act of war. This is a topic that just isn't going to go away, though. I wanted to at least give you two other references if you are interested in this, and I know we have a lot of people who are interested in this sort of thing that are very readable, even just based on the background for this introductory class on information security, very readable histories of cyber warfare incidents. Countdown to 0 Days, all about Stuxnet, and it goes in some detail. It's a very interesting, gripping, well-written book by Kim Zetter. And Dark Territory is sort of like a broader history that goes back to the early 80s and sort of the development of all of our national infrastructure here in the United States as it relates to prosecuting a cyber war or defending against cybersecurity incidents. Okay, so that's everything I wanted to talk about in today's lecture. We talked about some of the organizational problems that we are going to have to come to terms with in terms of emerging concerns, especially the Internet of Things, which is just always problematic from a security standpoint. And it's far from a mature security and privacy problem. We're going to have lots of development in that area in the next 5 to 10 years. Cybersecurity investment and economics and decision making are really, really challenged by our ability to measure anything with certainty, quantify anything with certainty. And over a decade of research and practice on electronic voting, it still remains a very difficult, unsolved research problem. And then, of course, cyber warfare, which we just talked about, continues to be very difficult to define, identify, and understand, presenting tons of new challenges that many of you will be dealing with over the course of your careers.